Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to go through my recommendations for jazz guitar amplifiers. We're going to be looking at each amp in terms of its availability, reliability, portability, sound and value. Those are the 5 categories that I'm using to judge each amp by. I'm only going to talk about amps that I've had personal experience with, either ones that I've owned, gigged or recorded with. So there's going to be a multi-range of amps on the video, but just the ones that I know about using. If you're new around here and you'd like a structured guide to start learning jazz guitar, then please check out the link below to my free beginner jazz guitar ebook. The first brand of amps on this list are Mambo amps. Mambo amps are handmade here in the UK by John Mambo. He makes all kinds of cool amps in terms of heads, combos, speakers, but the amps that I have personally used and have experience with are the combos. So they basically come in 8, 12 and 10-inch speaker variations. In terms of their availability, Mambo amps are available new by John. There's sometimes a waiting period because he does build them by himself. They occasionally come up on the used market, but most people tend to buy them new for reasons which I'll get into later in this review. I used to own a Mambo Wedge 8 and in terms of reliability I had no problems whatsoever. The amp was completely reliable for gigs, recording, jam sessions, no problems there. The good thing about Mambos as well, and I'm not being sponsored by Mambos or anything like that, but because they are made by one person who you usually have contact with, he can repair them and you know that he's around and he can do that, whereas some of the other amps on this list, that isn't always an option. I found my Mambo Wedge 8 to be very portable. It was basically an upgrade to me from the ZT Lunchbox, which was another 8-inch speaker amp, and the Mambo Wedge sounded better in every way possible, to be honest. And the reason why I got the ZT was because at the time I was doing lots of gigs and rehearsals, but I didn't drive. So I needed something that was light and portable. That's why I got the ZT, and when I started to hear about Mambos, I sold the ZT to get a Mambo. In terms of the value, Mambos are not the cheapest amp on the list, but they are probably the best value because when you order a Mambo, you can get all kinds of custom features that you can't get on the other amps. Like for example, a student of mine brought round a Mambo Wedge 10 a few months ago, and what I really liked about that was that he had a DI input on the amp. So if you're into recording from home like what I am, you don't have to mess around with microphones or amp simulators or anything like that. He can put his amp on, get an XLR cable, plug that into the amp, and he can record into his interface, getting the sound of the Mambo, which I thought was a really cool feature. In terms of their sound, Mambos are not quite as dark or coloured as say a Henriksen or a Polytone, but they're not as bright as a Fender amp. They lay right in the middle, so that can be a really good thing depending on what you want. I thought they sounded great with any of my guitars, archtops, tellies, all sounded great through the Mambo, so they really do rate high on the list. And if you want an amp now, you want a good amp that's going to be reliable, that you can just order and get some of these features, then you probably don't even need to watch the rest of this video. The next amp on the list is the Fender Blues Junior. I used to own a Blues Junior and a Pro Junior. Definitely prefer the Blues Junior. The Pro Junior is a great small amp, it sounded great, and if you're playing in quieter situations it's okay, but regular viewers of this channel will know that I'm not a massive fan of the Pro Junior because it really let me down with a loud drummer one time, and a Blues Junior would definitely not give you that same problem. Fender Blues Juniors are very available. You can get the Mark IV brand new from pretty much any guitar shop that you walk into, and there's always lots available on the used market and they're not too expensive. Blues Juniors are not the lightest amp on the list, but then again, if you're looking at an amp with a 12-inch speaker, then you're probably not going to be taking that on a train or a bus. Having said that, I've used and owned amps with 12-inch speakers which have been considerably heavier and bulkier, like for example a PV Classic 30 or even a Music Man 1112, are much bigger and heavier amps than a Blues Junior. In terms of value, Blues Juniors score high in my opinion. If you're buying one new, then they're considerably cheaper than say a Deluxe Reverb or a Princeton, and it's obviously going to be a bit louder than a Princeton as well. Used, they go for quite a bit cheaper, they're always available used, so in terms of the value, Blues Juniors, yeah, I think they're good amps. In terms of sound, the Blues Junior is the only tube amp on this video, so you're really comparing apples versus oranges. That being said, the Fender sound is basically all highs, lows, not much mids. So if you want that sound, that's great. I think that they sound fantastic in combos, they really cut through nice, and they have a certain sound to them that, you know, that's what a tube amp does. If you're playing a Fender amp, then that's the sound that you want. So that might be good. However, if you're looking for more of a coloured sound, a darker sound, and you play a telly and you really want a dark, kind of Joe Pass sound or something like that, then some of the other amps on this list might be more up your street. The next amps on this list are Polytone amps. Now I've done a complete separate video about Polytone, so if you want to know about the history of Polytone amps, then please check out the card in the video now. Polytone amps got discontinued in 2013, so you can only find them on the used market. So they're not as available as, say, something like a used Fender Blues Junior or something like that. If you look online and you look on, say, eBay or Reverb or something like that, then they occasionally might have 2 or 3 polytones, and sometimes there's none at all. So you can be playing the waiting game if you want a polytone. I've heard mixed things about polytone reliability. I've had a couple over the years, and I only had a problem with my Mega Brute once, and it was a very inexpensive, quick repair. I think it cost me £30 or $40 or something like that. That being said, because of how polytones are constructed in the inside with the fiberglass, some amp technicians don't like working on them, so it can be sometimes difficult to find an amp technician that can fix a polytone if they ever go wrong. And of course, if it is a solid state amp, like I said, I've owned several and I've only had one problem in mine, so I think that's probably is worth considering if you're looking at polytones. Polytone offered a range of different amps. They have basically smaller amps like Teeny, Baby, Mega Brutes, Mini Brutes, and then in the 70s, like many other amp companies, they had stacks as well. So most jazz guitar players use the Mini Brutes and Mega Brutes, so they are quite portable. The Mega Brutes, Teeny Brutes and Baby Brutes are much lighter and easier to carry than the Mini Brutes. In terms of value, I think polytones offer good value for money. There's only really jazz guitar players who are looking for even then a certain jazz guitar sound that actually seek them out, so they're never going to be worth tremendous amounts of money or anything like that, so you can always get them fairly inexpensive, to be fair. You know, sometimes they can go up or down and it can depend on how much you want them, so I think they offer good value for money. A polytone sound is definitely a one-trick pony, so if you're going to get a polytone sound, it does one thing and one thing well, which is a jazz guitar sound. If you like the sound of the classic 50s and 60s jazz guitar players like what I do, then this is the amp for you. Furthermore, if you're using something like a solid body guitar, then it can really thicken up and colour that sound into that kind of area. So if that's the sound that you're looking for, then definitely try out a polytone. So those are the main amps that I've owned and used for the longest, but there are a few other amps which I've also had for shorter periods of times or used at recording sessions and gigs, which I'm also going to discuss, not in as much detail as the others, but I'm just going to give you my thoughts on some other amps as well. As mentioned earlier, another amp I used to have is a ZT Lunchbox, which was a cool amp for the time. I used to use it with a reverb pedal. When I had that amp, I basically got this small carry case, so it was great for me back then because I could just put the carry case on my shoulder. I used to put a gig bag on my back and I'd put a reverb pedal in the gig bag and I'd go and do all my gigs like that. So it worked, it got the job done. However, when I started to use, like, I think after that I went to maybe a Fender Pro Junior with a reverb pedal, the difference was really night and day, and I was finding that the sound that I was getting from ZT at gigs really didn't do it for me after going to some of these bigger amps and some of these better sounding amps. Yeah, I can't really say that I'd recommend a ZT, to be honest. Another amp which I used to use a lot is a Henriksen jazz amp. So those are interesting amps. They colour the sound kind of like what a polytone does, but they don't really sound like polytones. It's probably the darkest. The Henriksen is the darkest amp which I've discussed here. When you plug into that, you really kind of get that, you know, that dark Jim Hall type of sound. So if you're into that, then they might be worth trying. They are quite expensive. They're kind of up there in terms of the amps that I've talked about on this list, and even used, they still seem to command a fair bit. But apparently they are quite easy to get fixed and they are quite reliable. I've just never really bonded with them that much enough to really own one myself. I've only used them at recording sessions and gigs and things like that. The last amp which I'd like to discuss is an AER compact amp, AER Compact 60 I believe, and this is really a favourite of a lot of jazz guitar players, but to be honest I never really got along with this amp. I think it sounds really thin, particularly on the high strings, at least for the type of sound that I want to go for. I know a few players that have got better sounds with it, and of course it is very portable, very loud. But for me, this is not an amp that I can really recommend personally, even though some really good jazz guitar players use them. So that concludes my thoughts on jazz guitar amps. So what I'd like to know is, what do you think of these amps suggested? What's your favourite amp? Please let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.